The champagne still clung to the lip of his glass when I walked into the room wearing white. Not ivory. Not cream. Wedding white. The hush that followed crackled like lightning in dry air. All eyes turned toward me, but I looked only at him, the man who once promised me forever, now seated beside my sister, her hand perched on his thigh like she owned him. He stood, stammered my name, but it was too late. Behind me, the doors opened again, and in walked my groom, tall, proud, and familiar to every single guest. Because he was my ex's father. My sister's face turned ghost white. My ex's mouth hung open like he'd forgotten how to breathe. And I just smiled. Not sweetly, not bitterly, but like someone who had planned every step of this moment to perfection. I turned toward the officiant and said, "Shall we begin?" And just like that, I shattered the last illusion they had left. Because this was not just a wedding. This was the moment they finally understood what betrayal costs, when it comes wrapped in vows, rings, and poetic justice. My name is Marissa Lee, and I am 28 years old. The man I once loved left me for my own sister, Serena, without warning, without remorse. One morning, we were planning our future together. By evening, he was calling off our engagement and whispering promises to someone who shared my blood. The betrayal tore through my life like a fire, burning everything I thought was safe. My sister, once my closest confidant, smiled as she took what was mine. And he, Darren, played the victim as though love simply changed direction and I was expected to accept it. But I am not made of smoke and ashes. I am made of quiet storms and sharpened resolve. While they flaunted their romance, thinking I had disappeared, I was laying a plan neither of them would ever see coming, one that began with forgiveness on my lips and revenge in my heart. I grew up in a small town where loyalty was sacred and betrayal was a scandal people whispered about for years. My family wasn't perfect, but we were close, or at least, I thought we were. My sister Serena and I were only 11 months apart, often mistaken for twins when we were younger. We had matching haircuts, matching clothes, even matching diaries, though hers always seemed to end up with more secrets than mine. Our parents raised us to share everything, and for the most part, we did. Toys, bedrooms, school gossip. But as we got older, the differences began to show. Where I was steady and soft-spoken, Serena was magnetic and dramatic. I was the listener, she was the storyteller. I stayed home to help when Mom got sick. Serena chased scholarships and travel programs that would take her away from the noise. We loved each other, but in very different ways. When I met Darren, I wasn't looking for anything serious. He had a quiet confidence about him, the kind of man who held doors and remembered the names of your coworkers. He managed his own small contracting business, and I admired his independence. We met at a community fundraiser. He was painting scenery for the local theater group, and I was organizing the bake sale. He asked for a cookie. I gave him a whole box. He asked for my number, and I gave him my heart without realizing it. We fell into a rhythm quickly. He had an old farmhouse outside of town that he'd been restoring, and I helped him pick tile colors and curtains. He brought me flowers from the farmer's market every other weekend. Our life wasn't flashy, but it felt safe. Honest. The kind of life that you build instead of chase. When he proposed on my 26th birthday, I said yes before he finished the question. Serena was the first person I called. She screamed with excitement. "Finally," she said. "I was starting to think you'd end up an old spinster." I laughed. She promised she'd fly in from Denver to help plan the wedding, take over the maid of honor duties, and make sure every detail was perfect. I want it to be unforgettable, she told me. It was, but not for the reasons she promised. In the months that followed, I noticed little things. Darren would light up when Serena walked into the room. He'd ask her opinion on things he normally left to me, like which light fixtures to choose or what music we should play during the ceremony. At first, I thought it was cute. They were getting along. She was helping. Family, right? But then came the lingering glances, the inside jokes, The moments when conversation stopped when I entered the room. I brushed it off, telling myself I was just tired. That planning a wedding was stressful, and maybe I was being too sensitive. I wanted everything to be perfect. Not because I believed in fairy tales, but because I believed in effort. I believed that if you showed up, if you gave love and time and presence, that it would be returned. I did not see the betrayal coming. Or maybe I did, and I simply didn't want to name it. There were signs I chose to ignore. Darren started staying out later for work. Serena extended her visit beyond what she originally planned, claiming she needed the space to reset. One evening, I found Darren's jacket in Serena's car. She claimed she had borrowed it during a storm. Another time, I caught them laughing over something on her phone, and when I asked what it was, they both went quiet. Still, I kept planning the wedding. I sent out invitations. I ordered my dress. Because I couldn't imagine that the two people closest to me would be building something behind my back. Until one morning, Darren didn't come home at all. I called his phone. No answer. I called Serena. No answer. My chest filled with a dread I didn't yet understand. Hours later, I received a text from Darren. We need to talk. The next day, I learned the truth. In a quiet booth at a diner we used to love, Darren looked at me with eyes that did not belong to the man I had agreed to marry. I think I've developed feelings for someone else, he said. He did not say Serena's name. He didn't need to. I walked out without finishing my coffee. I drove home with my hands clenched on the wheel, my mind echoing with every laugh, every shared glance, every time I had defended the two of them to my own doubts. Serena showed up at my door that evening. She didn't apologize. She didn't cry. She just shrugged and said, "You two were never right for each other." In that moment, I felt something shift. Something cold and clear. I didn't yell. I didn't throw things. I just smiled. And I said, "You're right." She looked confused. Maybe even relieved. But what she didn't realize was that I wasn't agreeing with her. I was accepting the invitation to a game neither of them knew I was capable of playing. Because if Darren wanted to trade me for someone who wore my face, I would let him. And then I'd show him what it felt like to lose something you didn't even understand until it was already gone. In the days following Darren's confession, I didn't cry. I didn't scream or rage or beg him to come back. Something inside me had snapped into place, like a glass pane finally shattering under years of pressure. I spent the first night alone in our farmhouse, surrounded by the plans and dreams we had stitched together. The guest list for our wedding still hung on the fridge, mocking me. The dress I had chosen sat quietly in the closet, untouched. My world hadn't just been turned upside down, it had been set on fire. I boxed up everything that reminded me of him. Every picture, every note, every trace of the man I thought I knew. I didn't throw them away. I stored them in the attic. I wanted them close, not because I couldn't let go, but because I knew I'd want to look back one day, not with tears, but with clarity. Meanwhile, Serena had moved in with Darren. Just like that. No hesitation, no shame. They didn't even try to hide it. Our friends were stunned, some unsure how to react. Others reached out to offer awkward sympathy, unsure of what to say. I told them all the same thing. I'm fine. But I wasn't. I was planning. Darren's father, Charles, called me 2 weeks later. He had always been kind to me, quiet, formal, but thoughtful in a way Darren never quite learned. He invited me to dinner, just to talk. "I never liked how fast this all happened," he said. "You deserve better." I didn't expect that dinner to feel like an exhale. I hadn't realized how tightly I'd been holding myself together until I sat across from Charles and simply spoke without judgment. He didn't pity me. He didn't pretend to understand. He just listened. And then he kept calling. We began seeing each other more often, harmless at first. He helped me with repairs on the farmhouse Darren had abandoned. We shared long walks through the town park. He even started bringing over groceries now and then. People noticed. And so did Serena. She sent me a message one night. "Really? Dad?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. By then, the rumors had already started swirling. The town was buzzing with speculation, their betrayal eclipsed by something even juicier. But while others gossiped, I watched. I waited. Because I had learned something in the quiet, revenge wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was slow, surgical. Darren had told me once that Charles held controlling shares in his contracting business. Darren might have managed the day-to-day, but his father still signed the big checks. And Serena? She was unemployed again, floating from dream to dream like a butterfly who never quite landed. They thought they had won, that I had faded. But the truth was, I had only just begun. One afternoon, Charles invited me to a small charity auction. He wore a navy suit, and I wore a red dress that made me feel whole again. Halfway through the event, he leaned in and said, "Would you do me the honor of having dinner with me next weekend?" As more than just friends. I looked him straight in the eye and said yes. And I meant it. Not because I wanted to make Darren jealous. Not even because I wanted to hurt Serena. But because Charles was kind. Because he saw me when I was invisible. And because I knew the power of timing. The following week, we went public. The reaction was explosive. Darren showed up on my porch that same night, red-faced and furious. "You're disgusting," he spat. "You think dating my father makes you better than us?" I didn't even blink. "I don't have to think it," I said. "I know it." He stormed off, and Serena followed with a glare that could crack glass. But their anger didn't shake me, because I had finally learned the difference between heartbreak and liberation. I was no longer the girl they betrayed. I was the woman who would rewrite the ending. At first, it was just awkward silences and lingering glances when we passed by each other in town. Darren couldn't believe it. Serena looked as if the world had turned upside down. They thought they held the cards. That I would crawl away, humiliated. But I was not the same girl who used to wait for Darren's calls, hoping to be chosen. That girl was gone. Charles and I weren't hiding. We didn't flaunt it either. But we were seen. Holding hands at the farmer's market. Laughing together at the cafe. Talking softly on his front porch late into the night. People stared. Some whispered. But no one dared say anything aloud, not with Charles being who he was. The gossip reached Darren fast. I could see the anger simmering beneath his calm facade. He looked thinner, his shirt collar no longer crisp. His posture had started to slump, like a man slowly collapsing under the weight of his own undoing. It started small. He removed me from the company's client emails. I had still been managing one of their long-term contracts, even after we broke up. Darren made it clear I was no longer welcome. The message wasn't signed, but I knew it was his hand. Still, I said nothing. I simply sent the client a brief note, informing them I was stepping back for personal reasons. 2 days later, that same client contacted Charles directly and asked for me to come back. I declined. Not because I couldn't, but because I wanted Darren to see what happened when people chose quality over pride. I knew he'd hear about it, and he did. Word travels quickly in small towns. Then came the next act. One morning, a letter appeared in my mailbox. An unsigned envelope. Inside was a printed copy of an old photo, me and Serena as teenagers, drunk and giggling in some forgotten college dorm. Scribbled across the image in red marker, "And you think you're better than her now?" I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was desperate. They were unraveling. Instead of rising, they were digging. Hoping to smear me. Hoping to distract from the truth. They had betrayed me. And now they had to live with it. Publicly. Meanwhile, Charles asked me to move in. Not out of impulse, but out of care. He said, "There's no shame in letting someone love you back." I had never heard it put that way before. I moved into his home a month later. It was a quiet, beautiful place overlooking the lake. And unlike the farmhouse, it had no ghosts. No shadows. Just warmth. That same week, Charles informed Darren of a shareholder meeting. A mandatory one. Darren didn't know it yet, but things were about to shift. Because Charles wasn't just my partner now. He was still the majority owner of Darren's entire business. and he was done letting his son ruin it. The shareholder meeting was scheduled for Thursday at noon. Darren arrived late. He walked into the boardroom like he always did, shoulders thrown back, tie slightly loosened to suggest ease and confidence. But this time, his smile faltered when he saw me sitting at the table beside Charles. He glanced between us, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. I could almost hear the gears grinding in his mind. His eyes narrowed as he realized this was not just a meeting, it was a reckoning. Charles began with formality. He reviewed quarterly numbers, discussed regional sales, and complimented the team on improved logistics. But then his tone shifted. "I've noticed a decline in executive leadership performance," he said, calmly, evenly, "particularly in client retention and internal ethics." Darren stiffened. "Are you implying something, Dad?" Charles looked at him. Not like a father, but like a man looking across the table at someone who had become a liability. "I'm not implying. I'm stating. You've lost 3 legacy clients in 2 quarters, our staff turnover rate has spiked, and there have been multiple HR complaints about retaliatory behavior." He paused. "That behavior includes attempts to sabotage former employees, particularly one who is now sitting at this table." All eyes turned to me. Darren's face flushed. "This is a personal ambush." "No," I said softly. "This is accountability." For the first time, Darren had no words. Charles then slid a file across the table. It contained documentation, emails, resignation letters, contract losses, and more. Everything collected over months. A full dossier of Darren's poor leadership and reckless pride. There was a vote. The board chose to limit Darren's authority, stripping him of hiring power and removing him from all client-facing roles. He didn't protest. He just sat there, quiet, seething. After the meeting, I walked past him without looking back. Later that week, Serena showed up at the cafe where I worked part-time for fun. She ordered a coffee she never drank, then hovered near the counter until I acknowledged her. "I hope you're proud of yourself," she said. I looked her in the eye. "I am." Her face twisted. "You always thought you were smarter than me." "I never had to think it," I said, and walked away. It wasn't cruelty. It was closure. She had stolen my partner, my sisterhood, my trust. She didn't get to steal my peace. And still, they kept digging. One evening, I found my tires slashed. No cameras, no witnesses. But the intent was loud. Charles offered to call the police. I said no. Let them show their desperation. Because my revenge wasn't vandalism or shouting matches. It was time, silence, and the life I was building right where they could see it. The town had begun to shift, too. People stopped smiling at Serena in the market. Clients chose other firms. Whispers floated in church pews and PTA meetings. Not gossip. Consequences. And I stayed quiet. Because when your enemies burn their own bridges, you never need to strike the match. It was a Sunday afternoon when the invitation arrived, hand-delivered, gold-trimmed, and so clearly desperate to impress that I nearly laughed. Darren and Serena were hosting a celebration of new beginnings at the family estate, and everyone in our town was invited. The message was clear. They wanted to reclaim their place in the community. After months of losing face, professionally and socially, they were attempting a rebrand. A staged photo opportunity. An illusion of grace. Charles raised an eyebrow when I showed him the card. "They want you to see what they think they've still got," he said. I nodded. "Then maybe I will." He didn't stop me. He knew, as I did, that this wasn't about pettiness. It was about showing them, and everyone else, that I was no longer the woman who cried in silence while they dismantled my life. The estate hadn't changed. White columns, manicured hedges, and a driveway so long it seemed to pretend at royalty. But the mood was different. There was tension in the way guests held their glasses. Smiles were tight, polite, performed. I entered alone, wearing a deep emerald dress that shimmered in the light. Conversations paused. Heads turned. And then Darren saw me. He did a double take. His jaw shifted. Serena was at his side, clinging to his arm like a child about to be sent to the principal's office. "Didn't think you'd come," he said, forcing a grin. "I was curious," I replied. "I like to see what people do when they think the cameras are watching." Serena stepped forward, her voice low and forced. "We wanted to show that we've moved past everything." I met her gaze. "Good. Because I have too." They didn't know that I had brought more than confidence. That week, I had finalized a deal with a startup legal consultancy, a firm founded by 3 women who, like me, had been dismissed and underestimated. Charles had invested. I had designed the branding. And the lead consultant was a former employee Darren had humiliated into quitting. The firm's first public client? Charles's company. His retirement plan now included stepping down from daily operations and placing his shares, the controlling ones, in a blind trust to be managed by the consultancy, which meant Darren would never hold true power again. The official announcement came 2 days after the party. The local paper ran the headline, "Family Firm Shifts Future, New Faces, New Vision." Inside was a photo of me shaking hands with Charles and the new managing director, a woman I had personally mentored. Serena tried to comment online, painting herself as a victim of internal politics. But no one replied. She and Darren had used betrayal and charm to get what they wanted. But they never understood that real loyalty cannot be faked, and once lost, it does not return. They were still legally married, still living in the house they once flaunted. But it meant nothing, because the invitations stopped coming. The clients stayed away. And I was building something real, respected, and entirely my own. They had each other and nothing else. And the town, without speaking a word, had chosen a side. It all came full circle on the night of the charity gala, the same annual event where Darren used to preen in his tailored tux, with Serena glowing at his side like she had earned the right to be envied. This year I arrived not alone, not broken, but standing tall beside Charles. We entered the ballroom with quiet confidence. The flash of camera lights didn't rattle me. The murmurs that swept across the crowd didn't sting. I had spent the past year rebuilding myself from the inside out, and every step I took across that polished floor was a declaration. I had survived them. Charles looked dashing, of course. But more importantly, he stood beside me like I was the only one who mattered. He held my hand like he meant it, like he had chosen me, not as a weapon against his son, not as a pawn, but as a partner. People noticed. They always do. We greeted a few familiar faces, politely declined small talk with the gossipers, and made our way to the front table, the one Serena once claimed as her own. Darren and Serena sat 2 tables behind us. I saw her first. Her smile was tight, eyes flickering toward me like she couldn't quite believe I had come. Darren, on the other hand, looked like he had been drained of all his usual arrogance. His suit fit too loosely, and his once carefree demeanor had soured into something bitter and nervous. They weren't running the event anymore. That role had been quietly passed on to me. After dinner, I was invited to speak. I hadn't planned to say much, but as I looked out at the audience, at the faces of people who had once pitied me, whispered about me, dismissed me, I felt something shift. I spoke about resilience. I spoke about betrayal, not as a tragedy, but as a turning point. I didn't name names. I didn't need to, everyone knew. I told them that when someone tries to bury you, sometimes they forget you are a seed. And from that soil, I had grown taller, stronger, and steadier than ever. When I finished, there was applause. Not the obligatory kind. Real, steady, respectful. I returned to my seat beside Charles. He leaned over and whispered, "You have no idea how proud I am of you." I smiled, not at the applause, not at the revenge, but at the calm I felt inside. Because the truth was, I had already won. Serena and Darren had imploded without my help. Charles had pulled out Darren's financial safety net months earlier after discovering the web of lies he had spun to protect their affair. The business connections, the inheritance, even the trust fund gone. Serena had reached out to me once in desperation. A message with one word, please. I never responded. Because revenge wasn't about hurting them. It was about freeing myself. I had never begged, never plotted, never stooped to their level. I had simply stood still while their own choices unraveled them. Now, they sat in borrowed status, watching as the life they thought they stole flourished in someone else's hands. And me? I walked out of that ballroom with Charles's hand in mine, my head high and my heart unburdened. I did not need to humiliate them. They had done it themselves. And my silence had spoken louder than anything they ever said. It has been almost a year since that night. Charles and I live in a quiet part of the city now, away from the glances and whispers that used to define my world. Life feels simpler, lighter, not because everything is perfect, but because I no longer carry the weight of proving my worth to those who tried to erase it. I do not hear much about Darren or Serena anymore. What little news floats back is always vague. I know they moved out of the city a few months after the gala. I know Darren tried to salvage his business ventures, but without Charles's name backing him, most of the doors he used to walk through remained shut. And Serena? Well, someone once told me she works part-time for a company she used to mock, the kind she said was beneath her. It is strange, really, how quickly a life built on appearances can crumble once the mirrors are gone. As for me, I did not marry Charles to spite Darren. That part is important. I married him because he saw me, truly saw me, not as a placeholder or a convenience, but as someone with depth, with pain, with fire. He never tried to fix me or mold me into something easier. He simply stood beside me as I stitched myself back together. Our relationship raised eyebrows, of course. But I stopped caring about those long ago. People will always talk. Let them. Their chatter never built anything real, and it certainly never broke me. What matters is that I now live a life I chose, not one that was handed to me or stolen from someone else. Sometimes I walk by that old coffee shop where Darren first introduced me to Serena. It used to sting. Now it barely flickers. Not because I forgot, but because I healed. And healing, real healing, is the sharpest revenge of all. I often wonder if Serena ever reflects on what she lost. Not the luxury, not the social position, but the trust, the bond, the love of a sister who would have given her the world. And Darren? I hope he finally learned that charm without character means nothing. That using people like stepping stones only works until the stones find their own foundation. So I ask you, if someone betrays your heart and underestimates your strength, do you fall apart for them? Or do you rise quietly, powerfully, until the very ground they stood on belongs to you? Because that is exactly what I did. And I would not change a single moment of it.